I had this friend once who, over Christmas break, unfortunately, her grandmother passed away. And during that same Christmas break, her parents were going through a divorce. So it was an incredibly difficult time for her. And I remember when I got back from Christmas break, the first time I saw her, we were talking about our Christmas break, and she'd asked me first how mine was going, and I kind of got involved, I kind of got wrapped up in how great of a Christmas break I had. And then I turned to her and I asked her, without even thinking, how was your Christmas break? And in that moment, I totally had forgotten that her grandmother had passed away and that her parents were going through a divorce. And so she turned to me and she said, "It's pretty much the worst Christmas of my life." And for a second, I was like, "Oh, really? Well, why?" But then I finally caught myself and I realized, oh my gosh, that's right. Her grandmother passed away and her parents are going through a divorce. But I was totally oblivious to the difficulty in her life in that moment. And part of the reason why I think was because I hadn't really been keeping up my prayer life. I hadn't been carrying her in my prayer during Christmas break. In those 2 weeks prior to that, I wasn't just praying much. And so when I met her in that spontaneous moment, I was totally oblivious to her pain and her grief and how much she desired mercy. Being a person of mercy means having a prayer life. And I think that's what distinguishes Jesus from so many of his peers in his day, right? In the gospel this week on Tuesday, we hear about the man who's ill and crippled, and for like 38 years, it says, and he'd been desiring to go down into this pool of the healing waters in Jerusalem, but he couldn't get there because all these people would pass him and they wouldn't help him on the way. And so Jesus meets this guy and he says, "Well, what's the deal? Why are you on the sidelines here?" And the guy says, "Well, every day I try to go down there, but nobody helps me and I can't get there in time." And it made me wonder, like, well, what was the difference between Jesus and all these hundreds and probably thousands of people that would pass this guy every day who needed their help, and that they didn't notice him, but Jesus noticed him? And I think the difference was that Jesus made a prayer part of his baseline every day, so that when he would meet people in the spontaneous moments, he could attend to their needs and he could be merciful to them. And so he could help that crippled man because he had already had his baseline prayer that day that made him available to others the rest of the day, right? And I think that was the difference between what I wasn't able to do and what Jesus did in that gospel. When I was with my friend that day after Christmas break, I hadn't made prayer a baseline for those couple weeks before. And so therefore, I wasn't able or capable to be merciful in the spontaneous moment with my friend. And I think what we hear from Jesus is that we got to make prayer a part of our day. It can't be just something spontaneous. I hear a lot of people say, "Oh, my life is a prayer," or I pray to God in the spontaneous moments, or throughout the day I spontaneously pray to God, or I'm carrying God with me throughout the day. And really, when you ask people and when you kind of talk about it more, I think what you find out is that really those people aren't really praying much at all, because they're just kind of relying on the spontaneous moments. And that's kind of what I was doing those days before, those couple of weeks before I had that conversation with my friend. My wife and I, we have date night once a week on Thursdays. And every week we do this, we go through the same script. We talk about kind of the same things, and we affirm each other, and it's kind of the same structured thing every week. And it kind of acts as a launching pad for the rest of our conversation that night, and really for the way that we connect the rest of the week. And people from an outside view might say, "Gosh, that's really structured and sounds kind of boring. Does that get old? I mean, you do that every week." And really, for my wife and I, it's kind of the opposite. Because we're intentional that way every week on Thursday nights, it helps us be more available to the spontaneous moments that we can connect to each other the rest of the week, the moments that we can't really predict. It helps prepare us for us because it really acts as our baseline rather than being this thing that we rely on in spontaneity that we're kind of looking for the rest of the week. But it helps us be available to the gift of the spontaneous moments the rest of the week because we have that baseline. And I think that the same is true for our prayer life, right? If we have a baseline every day in prayer, if we set aside time every day to pray, it's going to help us be much more available to the spontaneous moments throughout the day where we are called to respond in mercy, or where we're called to respond in some other way. But if we just rely on the spontaneity, the spontaneous moments to be our baseline, then we just don't have a baseline. Because what is spontaneous? It's something we can't rely on, right? It's not dependable, and we can't plan on it. If we have something we can rely on, then the spontaneous becomes more of a gift to us rather than our baseline, which is really a false baseline. And I think that's what Jesus is calling us to think about today. How is prayer a part? How do we make it our baseline every day so that we can respond in mercy to people in the spontaneous moments?